Good evening, everybody. Good evening.
I think Rich wants to talk.
Yeah. And the big thing I want to tell you is that you see this hat here? We're going to pass it around. We never had a crowd like this before. And you got to pay. Welcome to Stories of Vermilion, Oral History Series, presented by the Vermilion Area Archival Society in collaboration with the Vermilion History Museum and the Ritter Public Library. My name is Rich Tarrant. I'm the curator of the Vermilion History Museum. This program is going to be videotaped, so please turn off your cell phones. Our guest tonight is somebody that nobody here knows, of course. Don Parsons. Welcome, Don.
Well, thank you, Rich.
Excuse me, but I'm going to be asking you questions now and then that it'll seem odd. But don't take offense, please.
Okay, I won't.
Would you please tell us your name?
My name is. Let me first start. I got this thing out.
Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
I'd like to thank the Ritter Library for this beautiful meeting place, and for Rich Tarrant for all his efforts in presenting and trying to keep Vermilion history going through the Printers Museum, and also his email log. And I'd also like to thank the Vermilion Historical Society, and especially my niece, Kimberly Cole, who's done a lot of work on our family roots. Noticed I didn't say tree, I said the roots. So we'll start off. I am Don Parsons, and I was born in Lorain, Ohio, and in 1939, I got to follow this script that Rich has written on it for me. A number of people ask me something about the family history. Well, I go back. Solomon was born in 1766 in Winston, Connecticut, and came to Vermilion and died in 1842.
Did you know him?
No, I did not.
Okay.
But he had a son by the name of Nelson who was born in 1826 and died in 1913. It's getting closer, getting closer. His son was Burdett and was born in 1855 and died in 1897. And that was my grandfather Cliff Parsons' father. He fell overboard while fishing in December and got pneumonia and died in February. My Cliff was born in 1886 and died in 1997. My dad, Nelson Parsons, was born in 1913 and died in 1973. My dad married a woman by the name of Ritter Major Parsons, and she was from Lakewood. And we've had, my dad's name was Nelson George Parsons. I got an older brother by the name of Richard and younger sister by the name of Patricia. The first 5 or 6 years of my life I can't remember, but I grew up over here on the corner of Grand and Ferry Street. And then my family moved out to 6120 Liberty Avenue. They moved a house from the west end of Liberty, which at that time terminated at Decatur Street, and it was just a short street after that. There was a house there that my dad bought, took the roof off and had it moved out to the west end of town, added a roof to it, and we lived there for a number of years until 1950 when they built a new house right on the lake. The White House that was there was moved up on Lake Road and is still occupied by the LeGrand family. What was another question here? Got to get in order here.
What'd you do when you were young?
What did I do when I was young? Well, I grew up mainly on the west end of town, and so we did a lot of inner tubing in the summertime, and in the wintertime we played a lot of ice hockey, and we roamed around all the way up to Cask Villa and all the way down to the riverfront at the fish house. There was a number of young kids that lived on the west end of town, the Williams family. Some of the Wakefields were out there. So we kind of bummed around all together out there. During the summer months, I spent most of the time swimming and doing paddling around with a canoe and an inner tube. During the wintertime, of course, we did ice boating and played ice hockey and ice skated on the river mainly. What else you got here?
Okay, what types of jobs have you done?
What have I
Throughout
done?
your
Well,
life.
my very first job was on the corner of Liberty, northeast corner of Liberty and Main Street. And a fellow by the name of Sheeny Tisher and his wife Ruby, who lived next door to us on Grand Street, had a popcorn stand. And that was my very first job, making popcorn and selling peanuts. And in those days, Route 6 went right by them. So we got 15 cents for a bag of peanuts and a quarter for a box of popcorn. Now, if they jumped out of their car, I have a box already made up, and it was just full to top. But if they walked up, we kind of squoze the box and add more popcorn to it, so they got a good deal.
What were the best days? I'm just
Yeah,
curious.
those were, well, yeah.
Were it weekends?
Well, I worked a lot of days during the day because he was doing something, and so I'd work during the day. His wife, Ruby, would come down and help out if we got busy. And we had a number of commercial fishermen that would come up after they got off work and stop on their way across the street to Mount Elton to drink.
I'm going to get back to that. That's
Oh, okay.
You were in the service.
Yeah, I was spent 4 years in the U.S. Coast Guard. I started out on a 327-foot weather cutter in the North Atlantic, tending boilers. And then they sent me to boiler tender school. And while I was there, they closed the school up and sent me to engineman school. And I left Groton, Connecticut with an engineer's patch on my shoulder. I was a third-class engineman. They sent me to New York to be assigned to a duty station. My mess buddy in the service met me there. He did not want to go back to sea, so I told him I'd go to Rockaway, which was a 210-foot weather cutter. I knew her well, so I thought, well, I'll go on that. I don't mind going on that. And he got to go to Sandy Hook in New Jersey, which is a lifeboat station. But when he got there, they had no billet for him, so they put him on Ambrose Lightship, anchored off the Ambrose Channel, out in the middle of North Atlantic, not middle, but out in the North Atlantic. So I said to the oilman who gave me my orders, you know how to get to Rockaway? And I said, yeah, it's right over there at Bay St. George, right across the slip from my old ship, the Campbell. And he said, nah, that's not the way. Get on the Flatbush Avenue train and go all the way out to Long Island. He says, and at the end of that train, get off, take a bus over to Rockaway Beach, and you're going to be at a lifeboat station. And so I ended up at a lifeboat station, and I got there, and I was pretty new crew at the station, because most of the people there had been convicted of some felonies. We'll drop it there. But anyhow, so the skipper at the station was a W-2 warrant officer, and he took a liking to me, and the first thing he asked me to do was run a boat for him, so I did. And it must have impressed him, because 2 weeks later he sent me to Curtis Bay, Maryland, to pick up a brand new 44-foot motor lifeboat, which I ran from Curtis Bay, Maryland back to Rockaway, and I ran that boat for the next 3.5 years. And did search and rescue work on Jamaica Bay and off of Long Island. I worked a number of airplane crashes, which are not a pleasant thing to do. So I got a good round of education on seeing things.
Certainly sounds that way. I'm going to jump around here. We'll go back and forth,
Okay.
but there's certain things I want to know. For instance, community service here in Vermilion. Have you ever been involved in any community?
Well, I was in the Boy Scouts and the Sea Scouts, and then I spent 35 years, plus or minus, on the fire department.
That's what happened to it.
That's what happened to us.
That's
I took over from Dad Tisher, He was the first fire chief in Vermilion, did a fine job. I worked under 5 different chiefs, and they were all great men. I think the best chief we had that I'd served under was Gene Croft. And I can't tell you how many years he served.
Now, what's your wife's name? Do you remember?
Yeah, that's her. Where's she at? They're right over there. That's her.
Where'd you meet your wife?
My folks set this up for me.
Oh.
It's
Arranged marriage?
It's an arranged marriage, yes. Yeah. My wife Larry Zinn brought my wife to Vermilion to teach school. And she was living with Jesse Niddle at the far end of Liberty Avenue in those days, down next to Dean Quigley's house and that at the north end of the street. And her landlord was Jesse Niddle. And Jesse and my folks played cards together, and they, oh, you gotta meet this guy, you know. Well, finally I said, okay. So we went sailing one Sunday. Turned out to be kind of an interesting sail. She found herself out in a lake with a number of different gentlemen who imbibed. But we got back to shore all right, so we were all right. But, you know, nothing there. She kept saying to herself, how did I get myself in this? How did I get myself in this?
That's what she's saying right now.
Yeah, well, you know, we got married in 1967, and rented a house on Ohio Street, and the school teachers that were in there were supposed to move in June. We got married, went on our honeymoon, came back, and people were still there. What are you going to do? So I said, well, it just happened to be my brother and his wife were going on vacation, so we moved out to his place at Bluebird Beach and spent a couple of weeks there. They came home. We had to find another house. My grandfather said, well, you can live upstairs in our place on Decatur Street, so we moved there. And that came old hat quick. Then Rich Mason and his wife were doing a sabbatical, and they needed somebody to take care of the farm. I married a farm girl. We'll do that. So eventually I realized you had to pay rent. So finally the people moved out, and we moved into Ohio Street. And my wife taught school, and I worked down at the marina.
Interesting.
Well, it got more interesting after that.
Really?
Oh yeah, a lot more. So in December, we bought Riser's Boat Livery at the foot of Sandusky Street. That's in 67. 28 days later, on the 26th of January, 1968, we had a major flood. Wiped the front half of the building off. It was in shambles, with no heat in the place. Riser was living there temporarily. He left, and I couldn't see the thing sitting empty, so I said, well, we move in. She came home from school one day, and everything on Ohio Street was gone. She thought we'd been robbed. I said, no, we've just moved in down here. At night, the wind would blow, the lights would go off. The wind would stop blowing, the lights would come back on. Knob and tube wiring. So we survived. Then in 69, we had 13 foot of water go through the place in the 69 flood. So life's been rosy for us. We've got no complaints, none.
Wonderful, wonderful.
She's still with me too. That's 51 years ago.
She didn't tell you, but tonight's the end. Tell us about your children. I don't know them too well.
Well, our oldest boy is Nathan, and he's a photographer by trade. He's worked a number of different places. He's worked in Washington at Scripps Howard, at the Washington Post. His last official job was at the Toledo Blade. Then they had union problems, and when they got done with the union problems, they downsized the photography division and didn't need a director, so they got rid of him. So he looked around here for a number of years for a job, and he remarried to Amy Franks, and they're now living in Amelia Island, Florida, and he is a captain on a tour boat and teaching sailing lessons down there. Then my wife and I had a set of twins, or my wife had the twins, I was just there. She said, that'll never happen again, and I'll tell you that. So my son Cliff and his twin sister, which is the evil one, the two of them popped out, and today the two of them are running the business, and I'm doing nothing. Well, yeah, she's older by a couple minutes. How long? 12 and a half minutes. So what's a few minutes?
Tell.
You could tell, yeah.
What Vermilion businesses do you remember? Up and down Liberty, all around, any that you remember stick out in your mind? There was a lot there.
Yeah, there is. You want to start at the west end of town?
Sure.
You had Bond and Baker's grocery store at Bluebird Beach. Came down Lake Road. If you made the curve and missed Kyle Motor Company, you could come a little block farther north, and there was George Roberts on the corner with the golf station, where the police station is today. And there was a Lawson store there and a couple other places. And let's see, and then they come down. Doc Dickerson and Lorraine Telephone Company were across the street on Washington and Liberty. Then there was Waddy Stone's Chevy Garage and Maggie Snyder's Tavern, which is now Rudy's. And then there was a building there, but I can't remember what was in it. And then there was Kishman's, had a brick twine house there that they mended fishnets in.
Right.
I don't know what the building was between them. I don't remember that.
It was several things. It was a barber shop parcel
Right.
one time.
Carl Laux was in there.
Yeah, and
Gaiman,
yep.
yeah, Howard Gaiman.
And also there was, I think Nagley had a podiatrist there at one time.
Okay.
And moving on,
Yeah.
Fulpers.
Oh, on this, well, yeah, if you want to go on the
Oh, you can do
south
this
side, you
side.
got Fulpers. Then you had a soda grill. And then you had the theater, Williams Law Office. And we always called it M&M Grocery Store, Motz's, Lighthizer Restaurant, and then Wagner's Gift Shop, Okagi's, and Erie County Bank. On the north side, you had a house on the corner of Washington and Liberty, and then you had Fred Becker's blacksmith shop, and then Dick Baker's Chrysler and Dodge. Then there was a house, and then Glenn Martin's filling station.
Yep.
Then keep going. I
Yeah,
don't remember
keep
what
going.
I don't remember what was in the house on the corner. It was a funeral parlor at one time,
Yeah, but then it was just used as a home
just used
for
as
a
a home.
while. Yes,
Yeah.
for several years.
Then next to that was a Blattner hardware store, which is very similar to Bailey's hardware store. It was a two-story building with a lot of stuff up in the upstairs and a big sign that hung where his tools was that said, "The man who loans tools is out." Meaning, if you loan the tool out, you aren't going to get it back. Then next to it was shoe shop, and then the Goody Goody bar was in there,
Dairy bar.
the dairy bar, and then the White Inn.
Yep.
Rathman's big white building with great big green letters up there that said Rathman on it. White building. Next was Paul's Snack Shop. Seats 9,000, 9 at a time. That was what the matchbook said. The matchbook said that. And the truckers used to stop there all the time. Then the newsstand and Hart's Drugstore. And above Hart's Drugstore was Doc Anderson,
Yep.
the dentist.
Did you ever have your teeth worked on up there?
No,
You,
no.
something you wouldn't have wanted.
But
He was a big man.
yes, he was a big man.
I want to get back to just Blattner's hardware store for a minute. What about that store? You know more about that store than most people.
Well, it belonged to the Blattner family, and my grandfather married a Blattner, and when George died, they inherited the place. And about, I think, like 1940, mid-40s or so, Ohio Edison, was Ohio Power in those days, was on Grand Street, or no, it was on Grand Street across from Bailey's Hardware. And they wanted to have a showroom and offices and stuff, so my grandfather tore the building down and had Elmer Hume from Amherst build a concrete block building there that's there today called Papa Joe's.
What are some of your best memories of Vermilion? Probably a few. Huh?
They're all good. They're all good. if I had another town to grow up in, I couldn't find a better place than Vermilion as far as I'm concerned. In those days, when a young fellow or gal did something wrong, before they ever got home, their parents knew all about it. I mean, it was a done deal. Some of my best memories have been on the fire department with the guys on the fire department, Elmer Brushaver, Ding Jeffrey, Percy Hall, Andy Sterling. They were a great group of guys, and they worked hard and played hard and did a lot of things for the community. Street dances, especially on regatta weekend, when the fire department or the fishing game would put on a street dance on Friday and Saturday night. And then on Sunday, the regatta crew would put a big water sports thing on at the waterworks. In those days, there wasn't a big high wall, so there was a long sloping landscape there, and you could bring your chair or your blanket and lay there. And they brought in professional diving teams to put on shows. They had canoe tilts. They had dinghy races. They had swimming races across the river, both men and gals and guys. And so it was a lively little place in those days.
We talked a little bit before we got going here tonight about some of the people that you knew. Skim Backus was one of them.
Yeah.
You could tell a little bit about him, but there are other people as well that you knew along the river there.
Skin, unrelated to any of the Backuses in town now, Skin and his dad, and there had to be a mother somewhere in the line, but anyhow, they were commercial fishermen, and they worked for Kishman. And the two of them died exactly the same way. The father died first, of course, and he had no home. He lived aboard the Gillnet boat, Lester K., and they assume what happened is he got up at night and went to the stern of the boat to relieve himself and fell overboard and drowned. And they found him a couple days later. His son did the same thing, exactly the same thing, in the same place. The boat was tied up at the same location at the dock, and they just assumed that's what happened to him. The younger Skin that I knew, he'd get off the boat, he didn't, nothing with packing fish or anything like that. All he was a deckhand on a boat. He'd get off the boat, come up to the popcorn stand, buy a bag of peanuts, go across to Maud Elton, knew that the popcorn stand closed at 11 o'clock at night, so he was always back there at 11 o'clock to buy another bag of peanuts before he went back to the boat. And they claim that the only time he was ever sober was when the boat was away from the dock, and which I could believe. That's it. Oh, other people.
You don't know any other people?
Oh, yeah. I got to tell you a story about Ding Jeffrey.
Yeah, let's hear that.
Oh, no.
His daughter will appreciate that.
Yeah, right. Well, Ding, I was only on the fire department maybe, let's see, I think I came on in September or October. But anyhow, the first election, fire department always put on a big party upstairs at election time. And Ding was in charge of things. And nobody brought hot peppers, so he sent me to go get hot peppers. So I went to the store and bought a bottle of hot peppers. I don't know hot peppers, I don't know anything about peppers. Bought a bottle of hot peppers, went up there, he took the lid off, grabbed a hold of one, took a big bite out, spit it out, and said, "Go get some hot peppers." And I said, "Well, what brand do I get?" He said, "If you can't figure it out, take the lid off and taste it. And if it's hot, put the lid back on and buy it." So that's what I did. I never saw a guy that could eat peppers like he could. I mean, he'd take them right out of a jar and chomp them down, think one right after another. And the other thing Ding was famous for was washing dishes at the E&R Church. E&R Church bought some brand new Corel dishes. And they're washing dishes, and some woman was giving Ding a hard time. And Ding had probably that many plates in his hand. And he said, "Well, if they're so good, let's see." And he opened up his hand and dropped a whole bunch of them. Not one of them broke, but they didn't ask him to run the kitchen anymore. Yeah.
Nobody else along the river there, huh?
Yeah, well, our family always had big Christmas dinners, either at the Wakefield house, which was right behind my grandfather's house. His brother's name was Det, and he married Florence. And either they would have Christmas or Gramp would have Christmas in those days, because those two only had the big basement. And all the captains would come, Ott Full, Pete Full, Pop Nichols, geez, I can't think of all of them, George Reiber, Don Lawless. They'd all come down there late in the afternoon, and they'd sit around, and they would tell stories. And I'll always remember my dad saying, by golly, we're going to tape record this next there. Well, 79 years later, no tape recording. We just never did it. But the stories were something, I'll tell you. We had some real wild skippers in this town. Brocky Ward was one of them. He got to the point where they wouldn't let him captain a boat, but he could captain a barge. So Bob and Det would tow him around the Great Lakes. They'd tow the barge up to Duluth, load up, tow him back down. And every now and then, Brocky gets a little cranked up at night. He'd go out with axe and cut the tow line. Night watchman on the stern of the boat would go up to the old man and say, Bob or Det or whoever was running the boat, Brocky cut the line. So they'd have to pull the tow line in, turn around and go back and get a line back aboard them and then take them in. And they'd tow them to Lorraine or tow them to Cleveland and drop them off, and then Tug would pick them up and take them on in. Who else? I don't want to tell too many of them.
Those are good stories.
Yeah, they were good stories. And there, a lot of them about some of the things that happened. My grandfather used to have severe headaches. And he was coming down the Detroit River one year. And the old man put him off in Detroit at the Marine Hospital. And the doctor said to him, Cliff, just pull all your upper teeth. You'll never have another headache. Gramp says, okay. So they pulled all his other teeth. Boat was on its way back up. He got on the boat and never had another headache.
It's a miracle.
A miracle. He sailed until about 1908 or 1909. And, of course, his dad had died. His mother was trying to run the fish boat that Dad had. And one of the local fish houses was taking the fish. And the boys had come home, and they started looking at the books and thought, wow, there should be a lot more money in the account than this. So started doing a little investigation and decided that the fish house was scamming her. So they decided, the three boys, that somebody had to stay ashore and run the business. So Gramp got elected to stay ashore and run the business. His first boat was the Fred Driscoll, and he was 26 years old, and it was a 65-foot steam tug. And he ran her for a number of years.
Where was that built?
Probably here. So I don't know.
I think I have a picture of that boat.
I got a couple pictures of that boat.
Yeah.
And the crew. And now there's some real.
Who were they?
Well, I can't tell you all their names. I got them written down there. Gramp had to stand on the rail of the boat while the guys stood on the dock because he was so short. So that he could see, and they could see how tall he was. It made him look like he was tall. But I can't remember their names. Never even thought about it.
Talk a little bit about the catch when they came in. A lot of people don't understand just how much it
was.
Well,
back then, gill netting was the main way of catching fish. Now, if you're not familiar with gill netting is just webbing that runs between a line of corks on the top and a line of leads on the bottom. And it's made out of linen or silk in the early days. Linen was one of the main ones, and silk was. And they would stretch them for miles. There'd be nothing to have 4 or 5 miles of this netting stretched out. And they counted them by the number of corks that were on the top. So they'd either fish a 30 cork or a 40 cork net, but they'd tie it together continuously as they go along. And they had to lift the net every day because the fish drowned, because it went in head first and got caught, and his gills wouldn't open and close, so he had drowned. So in the summertime, they really didn't fish much. If there was a school of fish that somebody spotted, they'd go out and set it, and an hour later they'd pull the nets, because if they left it any longer in 70-degree water, the fish would rot and nothing. And the difference between gill net fish and trap net fish is you lift the gills up, and a gill net fish is, the gills are blonde when they bring them ashore. Trap net fish are bright red. You could always tell whether it was a trap net fish or a gill net fish by looking at the gills. And that's, gill netting was a very aggressive way of fishing. They produced a lot of whitefish and herring. And the interesting things about them, most of the pilot houses on the gill net boats, the front windows swung out so that the captain could smell the water. And as soon as you started smelling cucumbers, you started setting the nets, because the whitefish and the herring give off a cucumber smell, and then that's how they would find a fish. Well, pollution finally got rid of all the food that the whitefish and the herring ate, and of course got into blue pike, yellow pickerel, perch, sheephead, catfish, and the rest of the stuff. So gill netting was pretty much, I think they outlawed it in like 1950 or something like that. But at one time, we'd have as many as 50 tugs running out of this harbor. We had a lot of tugs that came down from Barcelona, the ports down in Pennsylvania would come up, New York would come up here. They'd winter in the Black River or winter in the Cuyahoga River. And as soon as they could start fishing on, which opening day was always the 15th of March. And so they would go out and set their nets and then pull into Vermilion. And one of the big fish houses on the river then would buy their fish. And that's how they get rid of them.
What time of day would they leave in the morning?
4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and they get back about 4:30, 5 o'clock at night. Some of the times they were running all the way down the lake to Ashtabula from here. The Vermilion boats were. And a number of times they got caught in the lake, and the ice would move in, and they'd get stuck, and they'd have to spend the night in the lake. And they had a stove aboard that was coal-fired mostly till the latter years. Then they started using oil, diesel oil. And the crews that came up here usually lived right aboard the boats. So it was pretty smelly along with the fish.
They hit the bars.
Oh yeah, bars. We had a number of good bars in the town.
Fishy places.
Yes.
From looking at a loaded boat when it came in off the lake, what would you say? I mean, it's hard to describe. I've seen it, but a lot of people haven't. What it looked like when they came in with a load of fish.
Well, trap net boats were the easiest ones to tell because they had scuppers on the side of the boat. And if they had a good catch, those scuppers were down in the water, dragging right in the water. The decks of the boats were solid steel. There was no ventilation on the decks at all, so they didn't have to worry about water getting down in the hull. And they'd load them right down. Nothing to bring 7-8 ton of fish in on a 40-foot boat. Who
processed the fish after it got in?
Well, that was done a number of different ways. Kishman's used a conveyor thing to unload into a conveyor that shot it up into a big bin inside, and they would take scoop shovels and shovel them into the boxes. My dad and Grandpa were more into product presentation, and so all our fish were hand-packed. A set of scales, you'd put the box with ice in it, and you'd tear it out to zero, and if you're putting 50 pounds in, you'd set it up to 50 pounds, and the guy on each end would pack it towards the heads. The head of the fish would always go to the end of the box. So at one end of the box went this way, one end of that box went that way. Now, if they were pickerel, they were always put in 50-pound boxes. The ice was put in, then white paper was put down, and the fish was laid belly up. So that when it got to New York, they took the lid off, they'd flip the box over on a sales stand in the fish market, and the fish would all be sitting right up and staring at you.
How did they ship them out of Vermilion?
Rail, during the 40s and 50s, early 50s, rail, and then trucking started about 53, 54. We went out of business in 57 when the state of Ohio offered to buy up our license. And my brother, dad, and grandpa and I decided that it was time to get out because we could see which way the fishing game was going, and it was time to get out of the business. So we did, and we started Sailboat Marina.
You any good at it?
Ask them. Christy is our chief rigger. Cliff is the head of the business, and the real boss is there with the, right there. That's the real boss. Mother's the bookkeeper, retired.
Wonderful. You miss it?
You miss fishing?
Fishing?
Yeah. I miss being on the water. I'd be on the water 7 days a week if I could.
Do you own a boat other than the
Yeah.
Mystic Belle?
Yeah. Well, no. My wife does.
Oh, okay. It's got a 400-foot yacht. So
No 400. We got a 30-foot single screw boat, just comfortable for two of us. And we try to get out and get going as much as we can. Not near as much as we like.
how'd you get the ice in the wintertime?
Well, there was 3 big ice houses on the river. Kishman had an ice house, Lightizers had an ice house, and we had an ice house. And they were 3-story structures, and they had conveyors that started down on lower level. And the fishermen all get together, and they'd hand saw the ice out and blocks, and slide it up, create a channel, and they'd slide it up to the conveyor. And as the ice house filled up, they raised the conveyor up in the air. Once it got full, they went to the next ice house and harvested.
How long did it keep, the ice?
Probably till the middle of summer. I don't know. I got pictures of them making ice and putting it in an ice house, but I never cut ice. I'm too young.
Sold the horse, huh?
They had horse-drawn saws, and there used to be a saying about how thick an ice was. That I think it's like 7 inches you can have a horse on it, 9 inches you can have a team of horses on it. And then sometime in the 40s, somebody came out with a gas-driven ice saw. And the last time the gas-driven ice saw was used, it was used to cut the river up because they thought they could prevent flooding. It didn't work.
Now, down at your place, you had a couple of old Lakeshore electric cars. Were those yours, or did they belong to someone else?
Number 35 was down there when Karen and I bought it. It was Riser's Bait and Tackle Shop, and there was a picture in the photojournal last week?
Yeah.
Last week.
Yeah.
Showed a picture where it said boats. The water was clean over the top of it in 1969, right, completely. So I cut it up and gave it to Joe Jevons, and he hauled it away and put it up there at his marina as a retaining wall.
Still there?
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
When you were talking about ice boating a while back, were you ice boating on the river or on
Yep.
the lake?
On river and in the lake. The biggest ice boat I remember was Sammy Law, who lived in the Madison house right across from the waterworks at Brick House. Sam Law lived there, and he built an ice boat, and the span of the runners was 24 feet. And I can't remember how long it was, but 12 people could get in the cockpit, and it would go. And we'd sail from Vermilion to Huron. In those days, for some reason, it always froze pretty nice between Vermilion and Huron, and before it broke off and the ice moved out and then came back in and built ice mounds. And once it built the ice mounds, that ice was there until spring. And you could sail. Many times I sailed to Huron from Vermilion.
How fast would they go?
Pretty fast. I would guess we probably got 15 to 20 mile an hour. It had a big sail on it and a jib.
Did you ever get in any trouble?
Yeah, a lot of times. And before I got home, the folks knew about it. We had a police officer in town by the name of P.D. Hootenlocker. And he had a high, squeaky voice. Police station at that time happened to be an old outhouse on the corner of Liberty and Main Street, right by the popcorn stand. And one night I was driving around with some other friends. One of my headlights went out. And I realized it. And I passed Petey. He turned around and I spun around and went around the block, and he followed me all over town. Finally just went to the house and told my dad. I came home. Dad says, Petey's been looking for you. And I said, for what? He said, well, you know. So we went out and got in the car. And as I was getting in the car, I hit the button and turned the headlights on, and they both were working. Dad looked at me for a minute and said, now hit the button again. And I said, well, all right. And so I hit it again, and of course one headlight went out. Said, you better go talk to Pete. And so I did. I went down and found Pete, and I apologized. Another time, my cousins and my two cousins lived out here in Bluebird Beach in the summertime. And they were in town along with Jack Scythe. And we got some fireworks. And little did I know that somebody in Bluebird Beach had threatened to shoot the place up. And we lit these firecrackers off 1 inchers, the whole packet at one time. And of course it sounded like somebody shooting the place up. And the cops were chasing us. Well, we all got away except for Jack Scythe. He got caught. Of course, when they came to the house, I came out of bed. We got Jack. And I said, oh, that's nice. What'd he do? Oh, well, we survived.
Well, you were out there west of town, and you talked a little bit about some of your friends. You were hanging around some of the, you'll have to remind me who they were out the west side of town here.
Well, you know, ran around a lot with Rick Copeland.
Ricky Copeland, okay.
Yeah, Ricky Copeland. Bobby Williams lived on Washington Street with Rick. And then Shirley Williams and Doug Keith took me to Florida one year. We were in college.
I was going to say, were you married?
No. This is how important it was in those days. Doug's driving. Shirley had to stop every now and then. Finally, we just told her, listen, if you got to pee, tell us you got to pee. Don't tell us you need to brush your teeth. But we had a letter from her dad stating that we, Doug and I, could take Shirley to Florida and bring her back legally. So that if we got stopped, we didn't have to worry about any problems with the law. So we tried to do things legal.
That's what you say.
Yeah. Yeah. Who else was there? Freddie Wakefield lived by the museum, in the big white house by the museum. And of course, you know, I graduated in '57, so there was some real troublemakers in that class. Joe Sharpnack, John Trenner.
They're still around.
Yeah, they are. They are. And we had a good time.
Did you play sports in high school?
No.
No?
Nope. Never played sports.
Play hooky?
Not really. Not really, because I tried to keep my nose at the grindstone. It didn't do any good. I didn't learn a lot, you know.
Who are some of those teachers? I know a few, but that you recall.
The best teacher I ever had was Gibby. He was the best teacher I ever had. He went way out of his way to see that I learned how to do trig and calculus, and way out of his way every night after school. I told you I was a hard learner. Ed Zemke, Ed was a football coach, basketball coach. I was a manager for 4 years, but that's as close to. And Ed's wife used to hate me to come to the house. In those days, Eileen washed all the football uniforms and all the basketball. Every Monday morning, I would take them over to the house. They lived on Decatur Street, south of Edson. And at least once a month, I put my elbow through their screen, the glass door. The door would blow open, I'd put my elbow out to stop it from slamming shut, and my elbow would go through. So I bought another glass door and put it in. Sarah Welker, she was great for letting us go. We could go down to Schwenson's and buy donuts anytime we wanted. All we had to do was tell her where we were going.
You know, that's odd. Somebody else told me that same story about when they were in her class.
Yeah, well, Sarah was a good teacher.
She must have ate a lot of donuts.
She taught typing, and I learned how to type from her. Doc Ream was a chemist, and we learned a lot of tricks with Doc Ream that we won't talk about.
Darn.
Darn.
Well, his son might want to know some of those.
No. Lorna Hooper, when she first came, then she married Al Schrader because Al's life had passed on. So Lorna Schrader was, I think I was about the only teachers that I ever really had any.
Who'd you have when you were in grade school? You remember any of those people?
Oh, yeah.
Who was your first grade teacher?
Mrs. Perdue.
A lot of people had her. Loved her, huh?
Yeah. She was also my second grade teacher. You can tell I didn't
Third
advance very
grade,
fast.
fourth grade.
No. No, I finally got out of the second grade and after 2 years. Then I had Mrs. Greenwald, Mrs. Yeamans, Mr. Peck. I really never liked that guy. He abused my body terribly. And one of the main times he did it, I was not guilty. I was an innocent standby.
Of course.
But I got it. But that's all right.
Who was the principal then?
Principal was Gabby.
In grade school?
Yeah.
Really? I didn't know that.
C.K. DeWitt was superintendent. Superintendent was C.K. DeWitt.
Yeah.
And he and Gabby came to Vermilion 21, 22 or something. I can remember him saying that.
Yeah, they were both coaches. I think they came over from the old school on State Street.
Yeah, from State Street. And Gabby was part of our men's church breakfast, and Ding was too. And every now and then Ding would make some comment, and Gabby would look at him and say, "And I still got the fireworks upstairs in my attic that you brought to school." And Ding would just kind of grin. And what else? You got a list here.
Yeah. How tall are you?
5'10". We used to, when the fish boats would come in loaded like that, the fish weren't in boxes. They were just on the deck of the boat, loose. So you had to shovel them off the deck of the boat into boxes to bring them into the fish house.
And that's what I was trying to get at when they came in, what they looked like when they came into port.
Well, we had boxes that were like 36 inches long and 24 inches, maybe 30 inches wide, about 12 inches deep, and we would put them in the front and the back all the way across the boat, and in between, from the front to the back of the boat would be open well, and we'd just throw the fish in there. And of course, most of it was pickerel, so you didn't have to sort much. And the boxes that were at each end, they would put the catfish and the other stuff in the perch. Perch didn't come on big until the late 40s. Then it became a big production fish. Blue pike was the biggest in the early 40s.
Did you ever sell any right there at the...
Yeah, we sold some. We had some markets that we had a guy from Rittman, Ohio that would come up on Thursday night with a pickup truck, and he'd buy boxes of fish, just dump them in the pickup truck, and we'd throw ice all over it, and he'd tarp it down. Then he'd go back to Rittman, and Friday morning he went to an old abandoned gas station, and he'd lift up a fish and auction it off. And that's the way he sold it, by auctioning. And we had a Jewish couple from Cleveland by the name of Edelsons that used to come out, and we had to use their boxes because they weren't going to pay for new boxes. And you'd get the box about halfway up on the truck, and the bottom would fall out. My dad would just look at him and say, "Hey, you're going to have to buy a new box." And Joe would say, "Can't afford a new box. Put that box on the truck and put the fish in it, and I'll just slide it ahead." And that's what he did. They used to, he and his wife used to come out, I guess it was on a Thursday or a Friday, and get fish. His wife's name was Celia, and she always bought a big hunk of hard salami and give it to us. Didn't change the price of anything, though.
What'd they charge for fish? Do you remember? It's just
Doug and
rough.
I packed perch down at the fish house. My folks tried to sell it 3 cents a pound. After 3 or 4 days, my dad would say, repack all the fish. So you'd dump them, repack them, re-ice them and everything, and still trying to get 3 cents a pound. One time they were sitting on about 6 or 7 ton of fish down there, and Lester Kishman made a deal with New York for 2 7/8 cents a pound. And I thought my dad was going to kill Lester. He left the fish house, headed for Lester's office. You know, that was a lot of money. Today they're getting $5.50 or $6 a pound on the deck of a boat for the same fish.
You would have been rich.
Yes, I am rich. I'm married with 3 kids and 8 grandchildren. Can't get any richer than that. That's the top.
You loan me some money?
Hey.
Okay. I'm still interested in all those people you grew up around.
I gave you a lot of them. I'm gonna look up.
Who was the crew on some of these vessels that Parsons had?
Oh, we had Chester Jackson. When my dad finally came ashore, my grandpa came ashore in 1942 when the federal government took the 65-foot gillnet tug the Alma by subscription for the war. Made a fireboat out of her in New York Harbor. And so Grandpa was boatless. So he came ashore. Sometime in the 40s, my dad came ashore, and Chester Jackson was hired as our skipper, and he was a slave driver. And I'll tell you what, but you made money. They fished for shares. The captain got the biggest share, and the 2 crewmen got fair, equal shares, and the house got the rest. And Chester pushed you hard. A number of times where instead of running a boat out and taking care of things, then coming back in and getting another boat, he'd demand that Dad either bring a boat or send one of us out with a boat to meet him out in the middle of the lake somewhere. No radar, no ship to shore, no cell phones, just a compass and a stopwatch. Said, 2 hours and 10 minutes east northeast, I'll be there. And so you pull out of the harbor and go east northeast, run 2 hours and 10 minutes and start looking. And that's the way it was. One of the stories my dad always told, when they built their own boats. They built the Rich first, trap net boats. They built the Rich first in 35, built the Don in 39, and the Pat in 45. And the Don was kind of an odd-shaped boat and had 2 portholes that you looked out of. It had a 6-cylinder Chrysler in it, never missed a beat. I don't care, whenever you went down there and hit the button, it started. They were fishing in what they call the shipping lanes between Southeast Shoal Light and Lorraine Light. They were fishing right on the border of that steamboat course. And they were out there in a fog, and Dad could hear this boat blowing. And it was getting closer, and it was getting closer, and it was getting closer. And my dad said, well, we're under a net. If it hits us when we're under a net, we're sure goners. We better get out from underneath the net. Now, underneath the net means trap nets are laid perpendicular to the shoreline, and they're anchored. And they have a buoy that they pick up the buoy on the stern of the boat, and then the middle section of the net comes up, and they slide the boat underneath the middle section, and then there's what they call lace pockets, and they take the lace pockets out, and they bail the fish out. So they were under the net. Well, pretty soon he could hear the wash of the steamboat coming, and he decided they better get out from underneath it. So he told the crew, we're going to dump it right now. So there's a jack in the back that has to be laid down. So they laid the jack down. 2 crewmen came forward. He hit the key switch, nothing. And you could hear the water getting closer and closer. And he hit the switch again, nothing. About that time, he's looking out the porthole, and all he could see was this big black thing getting closer and closer. He cleared the bow of the boat by about 10 feet. If she'd have started, he'd have probably gone right underneath her. I mean, but that's the only time the boat ever fell. And our mechanic was Elon Peck, and he was the top-notch mechanic. Elon was noted for grabbing a hold of a spark plug. It's not that cylinder that's bad. Nope, not that cylinder that's bad. This one here is causing a problem. So if you know anything about electricity, there's about 10,000 volts going through through that thing. You just grab a hold of them like there was nothing to it.
Where did he live? I'm just curious.
I think in VOL. Huh?
West of
In
town.
in Bollicksburg? Yeah. I don't know. Next time you see Eldon, ask him.
It's Eldon's dad?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
And we'll find out.
Then you'll find
Who
out.
else was on these boats?
Well, there was Chester Jackson and his brother Melvin, who stuttered, and Ray Maslanka. And when Melvin left, Tiny Grody came to work for us. Tiny left and went in the insurance business. When we closed the fish house up, Ray went to work for Ford. Chester went to work for Lester Kishman and ran a boat for Lester until he passed away. Let's see, who else? Well, the Alvy Snell had the boat JCS. It stands for Chuck and Jim. And they were the 2 deckhands for Alvy. And of course, Alvy lived next to you up there on
Sure.
Grand Street.
Yeah. This is not about much of that, but I have recordings of some of these guys, some actual video or audio recordings of Chester,
Yeah, I can believe that.
Alva Snell.
Chester liked to gamble.
He didn't drink, though.
I don't know.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I never knew him to drink, but
No.
I can believe that he didn't drink. But he used to go to Vegas all the time, and he did very well.
I'm sure he did.
Well,
But like you say, he was a real worker.
yes, he was.
Perfectionist, so.
We had a twine field out there west of town, and a couple in Bluebird Beach talked to my dad. They wanted to build a log cabin out there, and their name was Zoller. And this was a real log cabin. The logs came down from Michigan. They still had the bark and everything on them, and so they had to have a place. So Dad said, "Oh, you can park them in the north field there and strip them and do everything." And they built a beautiful cabin. And they were living there. Now, they're Cleveland people. They're not used to, being out here in the wilderness. Chester and Melvin would get in arguments One would be at one end of the field, the other would be at the other end of the field, and they'd start yelling at each other, and Melvin stuttered terribly. And so you can imagine. And Mrs. Aller used to call up all the time and complain to my dad, your men are out here, they're just blah, blah, blah. What can I do about it? They're grown men. Well, who else was there? Well, the LaCourses down at Kishman's always had the LaCourses. Vern and George Lighthizer ran, George ran the Henry L, and Vern was the head deck man. He was in charge of the pulling machine. And Turk Needing lived next to the print shop.
Right.
He was deckhand. And then Lloyd Lighthizer had a boat called the Martha, and she was a swayback boat. Her top went like this. And of course, they lost their fish house in 1955 or 1950 when they caught fire and burned to the ground.
Big fire. Yeah. You remember that?
Yep. Yep.
What do you remember of that? That's an interesting story too.
Well, they were doing something upstairs in the fish house. And the story goes that the pot spilled over and caught fire. So they ran down to the office, and Cleo was the office gal. And whoever ran the office said, call the fire department. And she says, where's the telephone book? And either George or Lloyd says, well, it's on the boat. So they ran out to the boat to get, by then the place was gone. My grandfather tried to convince Blosser, who was the chief, to call Lorraine, and didn't. And so my grandfather knew Nickley, who was chief down in Lorraine, and he called him, and they sent a pumper up, and their pumper went down to Moses and put their hard suction in the water down at Moses, thinking it was the Black River, and they had all kinds of water, not knowing it was shallow. And they sucked up the bottom and put the pumper out of commission. Well, you got to understand now, the city of Lorraine is used to deep water. And, you know, they dropped the hose over, and they probably got 17, 18 foot of water. And I imagine there was probably 5 feet or so at the dock, at the front end of the dock. And so they lost it. Mose lost a couple boats.
Did Lighthizers lose their boats in that?
No. The 2 gillnet boats were pushed off. Windy Needing had a trap net boat down there at the time, and Bill Eberly had a boat down there at the time. And I don't know whether Hoska was down there at that time or whether he was at our place. Martin Hoska was from Toledo, and he had a barge, and he'd tow the barge from port to port, and the guys would live aboard the barge, and they'd fish, and then they loaded the fish on a truck and took them back to Toledo every night.
When you're listening to all these guys, these old fishermen down there, when you're young, do they talk about bootleg days?
No.
No? Never?
No, I didn't. The only thing I ever heard my grandfather say was they'd never ran a case of booze across our dock. Now, I've read a lot of stories about, supposedly true stories about bootlegging, and I knew one guy that was bootlegging, and that was Eddie Zess, that lived on Adams Street, just south of the tracks.
Yep.
On the east side. And Eddie had the holes through his chest where the Coast Guard shot him, and he lived. And he went to work for Wells. And that's a true story, I know, because more than once he showed me the bullet holes through his chest.
I knew him. If I knew that, I should have asked him.
Yeah.
Too late now.
Yeah. His daughter, Jean, used to babysit for us. So we got to see him a lot and hear some of the stories.
I can't imagine anybody babysitting for the Parsons boys. What a job.
Hey, My folks were smart. They didn't leave us alone.
You probably recall rather vividly before they put the new road, what I call the new road down
Right.
here, going down through in that area
Yep.
there.
Well, as you went west on Liberty, once you got to Decatur Street, if you didn't make the turn, you ended up in Don Engelbrecht's front yard, and more than one semi were laying on their side there. But if you went straight, you would come to the Edson Creek. And on this side of the creek, Doc Dickinson and his wife had a horse barn, and they had horses, and there was a telephone pole that went between the barn and the house across the creek. So every time you wanted to go to the barn, you had to walk this telephone pole. There was no flat spots on it, it was just a regular telephone pole.
Did you live out there in the west side before that went through?
Yeah, I lived out there from 1947 or something like that.
Well, how did you get back and forth to school?
Walk.
Where? Down Adams Street?
No, walked from
Along the
the
road?
house down Liberty or down Lake Road and up Decatur Street to South Street. I went to South Street School.
Your parents let you walk all that way?
Yeah, we didn't have any choice. They didn't have buses. Buses started at George Wakefield's house out there.
Going out that way.
Yeah, that was the first stop, I think.
Yeah, okay.
Like 120 or something like that was the stop number.
That's out near Sherrod Park is where he's talking about.
Yeah, right across from Charlie Adams is where Colonial Courts is
Right.
now.
Right.
And of course, Bluebird Beach was, the people that lived in Bluebird Beach were all from Cleveland, and they were all in a related business. And they used to have some tremendous parties over there. And every Friday, the beer truck would stop, and at one house had this built-in cooler, and they'd put the beer in it with a tap, and then the ice guy would come. In those days, we had icemen, and it was from City Ice and Fuel in Sandusky, and he'd get there about an hour after they were there, and he'd fill the thing full of ice. Opened up the other door, and it was rows of mug. It was like going to the Olympic Club.
It's not like that anymore.
Oh, come on now. You got a tavern up there now.
What business were they involved with at Bluebird? Do you remember?
Mostly in the printing business, advertising and printing.
Because I'm thinking about Zoller's, that house.
Well, they were in the music business.
That's what I thought.
And the reason they moved out to Vermilion was that John Zoller was at work one day and he was robbed at gunpoint. And he closed the door and said, "We're moving to Vermilion." And he went back and forth to Cleveland for another couple of years and then finally moved out here permanently. And the girls all went to school here,
Right.
and that caused trouble.
Yeah. Ask Bruce over there about him.
Do you remember the fight you and I had down to the
Oh.
Bluebird Beach?
No.
With the mud?
Yes. Jerry Sire was in my class. In the class reunion, we saw each other, and we immediately both started laughing about the same thing. I had nailed Don pretty bad with some mud, and I ran up the steps, up the cliff, and he grabbed some mud. He was coming after me, and I knew I was in trouble. Mrs. Sire had just put her laundry out. But I ran in between the sheets, and sure enough,
I didn't. But I threw.
he hit that mud, and I can still hear Mrs. Sire scream, "Oh!"
Has anybody else out there got questions for Don? He's anxious to answer all your questions.
No.
Did you dry your nets on the west side of town? On the west side laid out there and that being drying out. Who did that?
We did that. Yeah, that was our field was on the west end of town. Kishman's field was on the south, or was on the east end of town, and Elvie Snell's field was off on Stanley Road.
We come back from the buses, your nets would always be laid out there every day. You tell the drying from being out and fishing.
See, he's as old as I am.
I think he's about 10 years younger.
No.
Anyone else?
You'll have to tell him about that. Eddie Solomon's blue pike dressing. Eddie Solomon used to demand that his pickerel would be a certain size, and he put a big show on when he served them. The waitress was taught how to bring the fish out and present it to the customer, and and it had head and eyes and everything were still in it. The only thing wasn't in it was the interiors and the gills. We had to dress them out. And sheephead was a big production fish. Couldn't do anything with. I mean, it was horrible. And Charlie, Eddie's dad, decided that he was going to try to make fish patties. So we made fish patties, and we froze them. And he started serving them. And by golly, they went. He was doing 100 pounds of fish patties a week there for a while. Eddie got drunk one night and told everybody what was in the fish patties. That was it. That was it. That was the end of the fish patties. You couldn't give them away. But people ate them. I mean, and they were good. They were good. But we picked small fish and we grind them up and the sheephead have a calcium deposit behind their gills, and if you get a sheephead and you take the two stones out, they have an L on them, and they were called lucky stones. And
You got a pocket full of them?
no.
No. Anybody else got a question or two for him, for Don? There's one back here.
What about any comments about Leroy Lee Bochard and Fath
Oh
Hour?
yeah, Fath Hours were right across the. Actually, Fath Hour's big building was about where where the Quaker Stake building is now, and it was a 2-story building with a well in it. And Al Fathauer had a machine shop, and he was a good mechanic. And then there was 2 houses back towards the highway. One was a bigger house, and he and his wife lived in. And a smaller house, his son and wife and kids would live in during the summertime. I think they lived in Cleveland during the winter. But they had a fuel dock, and Al did service boats. He had a big old cabin cruiser in there that used to have a big engine in it. It had a little small 4-cylinder gas engine that they would use to drive the boat in and out of the harbor. Then once they got the boat in the lake, they would, and I think it was a Hull Scott? Allison 12-cylinder. And they would fire that thing up and go. I mean, it was long and narrow, and she was a fast boat. And L.D. Lee had a boatyard with the Marine Railway that's now is Vermilion Power Boats. And L.D. was quite a character. He had a daughter named Nancy and a son named Bill. And he had the Shepherd boat sales, and he ran speedboat rides. And he had a yard manager by the name of Frank. Frank lived in a shack, and there was just a bed in the shack and a stove, and a heating stove in the shack. And on the heating stove there was always about a 5-gallon can of lard and soap that they used to grease the planks when they'd pull the boats out. And they used the railway, and they'd bring the boat up on a railway and get it to where they wanted it, and then they would grease these planks, and then they would slide the boat sideways, and then jack the boat off of the framework, and then slide the framework back and put it back in the water and pull another one. Had 2 marine railways in town. Mose had the one, and L.D. Lee had the other one. When L.D. Lee sold out to power boats, he moved up the river and started what is now Valley Harbor. And after he sold that, he went east of town and started Shady Lake.
Is there any truth that railway on the river is anchor weight would flip the propeller now and then?
I never heard that.
Water?
I don't know. Tom Mose would probably be able to tell you better, because their railway, the deadhead, was over in the lagoons, so it was pretty well down. And I don't ever remember hearing anything about anybody hitting it, but it could. I could see, because there was just like a 4-part cable going over there to the deadhead.
Any more questions?
Maybe you can tell them, Don, about where the golf course is by the Vermilion River. Used to be a bunch of nothing but muskrat houses and a big slough area.
Oh, you're talking about Romps.
Yeah.
Yeah, right across the bridge and right.
Yeah, Romps Waterport. Well, in those days, I think it was called George Orth's. Is that right? George Orth?
There was a George Orth. I don't.
Yeah.
He was probably in there. Yeah. He had
I think
something.
that was a swamp area, and yeah, and then Romps bought it from Mishlik. Yeah, that was a big swamp area, about where Romps' main office is and their shop. There was small cabins that fishermen used to rent, and they had canoe rental and some boat rental. The other boat rental was on the other side of the river, and it was Smitty's and Showalter's and Al Galinka's, and at one time there was 3 boat rentals on the river. Then up the river at where West Shore Boat Club is, was called Lafferty's, and that was a canoe rental, and they had the brightest decorated canoes with big colorful circles painted on them. You could always tell which canoes were Lafferty's.
Well, Don, it's getting late.
Yeah.
Really appreciate this. I think there's a lot of people here too. Thank you for coming here today.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.